here in the United States at the United Nations giving a speech, but not everyone stuck around for the speech. Some just are sick of what he says. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Lawrence Cannon protested the Iranian president walking out on the speech. He joins us live. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you.
Sir, you walked out of the speech before it even began. Why did you walk out?
Well, we had signaled this. The Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, Prime Minister of Canada, indicated earlier today that the outrageous statements by Iran's president, denying, of course, the Holocaust, casting terrible aspersions against the State of Israel, the complete violation for human rights, as we've seen as we've seen Iran over the course of the last several years, complete disregard for United Nations Security Council resolutions, prompted us quite clearly not to be in the same room as the Iranians while the president was making his speech. And that's the reason why we left the General Assembly of the United Nations when he was addressing them.
Well, it's interesting. Israel didn't show up, so they left before the speech began. You did too. The United States waited a while, and I guess it's sort of like, you know, what took us so long, because we certainly knew what he was going to say, and we certainly know his history. You have any thoughts about why it might have taken other countries a little bit longer to get up and leave?
Well, you know, from our perspective, we've looked at this Iranian leadership over the course of the last several years. I'll give you another example of what is now taking place. There is an Iranian Canadian who works for Newsweek who actually is in jail in Tehran. He is there without any consular assistance from the government of Canada. His wife is back home in Montreal. She is with child, expecting, I should say, a child very shortly. For humanitarian reasons, we've asked the government of Iran, I have spoken to their foreign minister, asked that this individual be released. There are no charges pending against them, and yet they refuse to recognize that he is a dual citizen both of Canada and Iran. And, you know, this is just another example among numerous examples of Iran's outrageous behavior.
What do they say to you when you ask them, like, you know, what about this guy? You know, what's going on with this man? Do they just sit and listen to you, or I mean, what do they tell you?
Well, they're extremely. They tell us that he was involved in a plot. He is a person that they deny, of course, Mr. Bahari's Canadian citizenship. These are the continual responses we get from this government. So, you know, we've decided to protest. We've decided to protest by walking out on their president's speech and by alerting the world community to the behavior that Iran has undertaken over the course of the last several years. It seems to us that as today President Obama was calling for a united nations and emphasized on the united, we all need to be able to come together and look at different ways to move forward. Iran has to be able to do that. They have to wake up and get within the world community, move forward with the world community in lockstep, and to be able to come to grips with horrendous and horrible abuses to human rights, and that is the whole issue that's before us.
Well, it seems like Canada may have taken a little bit tougher position, having walked out before, and I might add, I think there are 3 Americans being held there, and plus last night we had on an American housewife whose husband is a former FBI agent, and she has no information about them, information we'd love to have, and yet, you know, many of our friends, other nations, didn't walk out at all. So there were countries that stayed behind, were there not?
Well, I can't tell you who stayed behind, because obviously I didn't take account when the president started his speech. I immediately left the room. So I'm not in a position to tell you who stayed and who did not stay, but I do, of course, sympathize with those American families who have loved ones who are in captivity in Iran, having not been charged. I think that the world community needs to realize this, and we need to be able to speak out as forcefully as possible on this issue and condemn Iran for what they're doing, not only on human rights, but as well, as I mentioned before, on their anti-Semitic behavior.
And indeed, it is horrible anti-Semitic behavior. The As I say, I don't know if he's delusional or just mean about the Holocaust, but either one is bad. Anyway, sir, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Good evening.